It began as any other speaking event, but in a single moment, everything changed. Charlie Kirk stood before a crowd on campus, words still forming in his mind, when a gunshot split the air. In an instant, a public lecture became a crime scene. Students fled. Cameras swung erratically. And the world watched as emergency responders and law enforcement descended like a storm. This wasn't just a shocking act of violence. It was the opening chapter of a story that's become more about power, secrecy, and speed than justice. Before we go deeper into what's unfolding, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss the next update on this investigation, or the next story that demands your attention. In the first 24 hours after the shooting, over 11,000 tips came pouring in from the public. Simultaneously, 16,000 digital submissions, videos, texts, social media content, emails, landed on investigators' desks. That's a staggering volume of information. On one hand, it's a sign of public engagement and urgency. People didn't wait. They sent what they had: cell phone videos, images, potential leads, recollections from bystanders. On the other hand, it's an overwhelming mountain to climb. Sorting that many leads is a logistical challenge. You need trained analysts, databases, cross-referencing tools. Even with resources, every lead doesn't carry equal weight. False alarms, misidentifications, duplicates, low-quality footage, they all clutter the space. The question becomes, how do you triage? Which tips merit deep dives, and which are quietly set aside? Here's where the tension emerges. Normally, investigators would take their time to vet, cross-validate, compare statements, and build a timeline. But in this case, the speed of action has outpaced our confidence in the process. The rush to name a suspect, Tyler Robinson, came before all video evidence was fully analyzed, before inconsistencies in witness accounts were fully reconciled, and before all digital footprints had been traced. In short, the public turned in its information, but the system may not have fully processed it before announcing conclusions. When so much data floods in, decision-makers face pressure. They might default to the most coherent narrative, the one that fits fastest. And in high-stake cases, the temptation to close the loop quickly is strong. But closing early risks leaving holes, unexplored clues, ignored angles, silenced witnesses. That's what many critics fear is happening here. Sometimes, change is necessary. But in the midst of a high-profile investigation, wholesale turnover in key posts invites scrutiny. Here's what observers have noted: the judge assigned, the coroner, the lead investigative authority, all are recent appointees. Their names, experience, and histories haven't had time to settle in the public consciousness or legal precedent. Judge Tony F. Graff Jr., for instance, only joined the 4th District Court in Utah in May 2025. His courtroom will oversee trials in this case. The lead investigator, Robert B.S., reportedly relocated from Washington, D.C., to Utah specifically for this case. The State Bureau Director was recently replaced by someone with roots in federal systems. Even the coroner, whose name remains unconfirmed, was newly installed. And none of these transitions have been accompanied by clear public rationale. Why does this matter? Because continuity and institutional memory matter in criminal investigations. Investigators who've worked in a jurisdiction know the local culture, the legal precedents, the media environment, and the procedural norms. An established coroner knows hospital networks, forensic labs, chain of custody protocols. But when many of these roles are filled fresh, without time to adapt or be scrutinized, it raises questions. Was this restructuring planned? Who chose these individuals, and at whose direction? The timing is too sharp to ignore. For an assassination case with potential political consequences, installing new actors at important checkpoints might shift the balance of oversight. It's not necessarily a conspiracy, but it does shift risk. Newcomers may feel pressure, may not have established relationships with reporting channels, or may default to deference when confronted with federal agents or higher-level influence. One of the most puzzling decisions in this case involves medical care. When Kirk was shot, one might expect him to be transported to the nearest, best-equipped trauma center, especially for a grave neck wound. Instead, he was taken to a regional hospital with a lower ranking for emergency and trauma care. To complicate matters further, that hospital is now led by a newly appointed CEO and lead trauma surgeon. Had their involvement in Kirk's care been disclosed? Has anyone explained why this facility was chosen over stronger alternatives? Not convincingly. In trauma medicine, choosing the right hospital fast is critical. Minutes count. The nearest facility might not always be best equipped, but diverting too far or choosing a less capable place raises red flags about protocols, motives, or underlying direction. Given the stakes and visibility of this case, the absence of transparent justification is unsettling. Even more questionable, did those new hospital leaders have a role in directing the decision? Were there communications, internal or external, that influenced the path of transport? Did jurisdictional or institutional allegiances decide where he ended up? If so, that's a conversation not yet had in public. And missing it can leave lingering doubts. Almost before the campus had cleared, federal agents appeared. Not in hours or days, minutes. No press briefings explained their presence. No coordination announcements declared their mandate. Just swift entrance, early control, and a palpable shift in visible authority. When federal agents intervene, even in supportive capacities, there is typically acknowledgement. The public, the media, civil observers, expects at least a nod to interagency cooperation. We're helping state investigators, or we bring special expertise. But here, the arrival of federal personnel was silent, unexplained, and early. That silence creates space for suspicion. Was it protocol, or a quiet federal takeover? In state-level criminal matters, jurisdiction matters. The default is local authority. State or county law enforcement takes primary control unless there's a federal statute or counter-terror link. But that division hinges on procedure, not just presence. When federal personnel show up too fast, and local agencies defer, the dynamic changes. Cooperative support can become silent control. And when control shifts before the public or local actors can fully engage, questions begin. Who's steering the probe, and what becomes public? From nearly the first hours, the information flow has been chokehold. Key crime scene areas were locked down. Witnesses, it said, were told to stick to approved statements. Footage, some captured by students, cell phones, ambient cameras, was sealed or withheld. Preliminary investigative notes and evidence logs weren't released in public records the way they typically are in high-profile cases. Some potential witnesses say they were never contacted again after initial interviews. Others say authorities told them not to deviate from previously submitted accounts. It's important to clarify, there may be legitimate reasons for restrictions, protecting ongoing investigative integrity, securing chain of custody, preventing tampering, preserving the rights of involved persons. But restrictions should be justified publicly and transparently. You don't automatically lock everything down without explanation. The withholding, the messaging to witnesses, and the lack of detail about what remains sealed invite a narrative of concealment. A confirmed autopsy did occur, despite rumors. But in Utah, autopsy reports are private unless released by the family. That means even one of the most critical forensic documents may never see full daylight unless someone pushes for it. So not only is physical evidence being hidden, but even potentially essential medical findings are shielded by statute and process. Legal analysts familiar with federal-state interactions see patterns here. They note that even when federal influence is not explicit, it doesn't need to be. Quiet nudges, institutional expectations, and norms of deference can subtly rewire how a case is conducted. And the language being used is telling. Terms like expedited resolution, national security considerations, federal interest, are appearing earlier than you'd expect in a state homicide probe. These phrases are common in counterterror cases, national security litigation, and high-stakes federal matters, not in local shootings. Their early presence suggests the possibility that decisions about this case are not being made purely under standard homicide protocol. What's more, requests for extra time, more thorough field interviews, or delayed filing of motions are reportedly being met with unspoken resistance. The pace of the case has shifted from data collection to administrative momentum. Again, that's not proof of misconduct, but it is a shift from investigation to management. And many are asking, who instigated it? The change in tone seems to have happened quickly, before all the evidence was in, before all witnesses were heard, before full analysis could occur. That shift raises a suspicion that this case is not just being solved, but shaped. Within days, Tyler Robinson emerged not just as a suspect, but as the suspect. Other leads were quietly narrowed or discounted. Rather than exploring alternative theories or maintaining openness, the case's narrative was anchored almost immediately to Robinson. And here's the problem, that anchor seems to have preempted full evidence review. Several witnesses gave divergent accounts, different angles, sounds, even contradictions in law enforcement placement on the ground. Some physical evidence or footage remained unprocessed at the time the narrative was set. Digital records, phone logs, transmission data were still being traced. Instead of reconciling those conflicts, statements were standardized. Discrepancies were set aside. The story moved past exploration and settled into assertion. In any significant investigation, a responsible chronology is: collect evidence, analyze, eliminate theories, then build case. Here, the reverse feels true: build a theory, then accommodate evidence. That inversion fuels skepticism. If you commit early, you risk ignoring data that contradicts. Promises were made that the FBI would be transparent, that investigations would proceed objectively, that public trust would be maintained. Those promises have weakened. Public updates have slowed. Sealed filings have proliferated. Public briefings have become rarer. Behind the cameras, agencies whisper about resolution instead of investigation. The net effect: the more the public demands clarity, the softer the response. This isn't just frustration. In a democracy, justice depends on trust. Speed without explanation appears as imposed closure. Silence without transparency appears as concealment. And for a community that watched its campus shift from safe lecture hall to crime scene, that trust matters. If this case is formally closed before full review, the consequences are severe. Unresolved contradictions will linger. Witness accounts that don't fit the narrative will be sidelined. Footage that hasn't yet surfaced might remain unseen. Digital trails may grow cold. And once sealed, access to these materials becomes far more difficult, both for legal challengers and for public oversight. Closure in name can become closure in memory. If the case is locked down administratively, the opportunity for secondary reviews, appeal arguments, reinterpretation, or re-examination dwindles. The public, especially the campus community, may never see full explanation. That gap erodes institutional legitimacy. The message becomes, finish the story, not follow it. And that's not justice. That's management. We are not entertaining conspiracy. We are insisting on due process. We are not asking for chaos. We are demanding clarity. The public's voice is not a chorus of noise. It is a call for accountability. So what must happen next? Every major decision, hospital choice, staffing, federal involvement, must be explained, not ignored. Sealed evidence should be reviewed under oversight, not hidden without justification. Competing witness accounts need reconciliation, not erasure. The autopsy should be declassified, or at least summarized transparently. Any federal involvement must be clear in role, scope, and limitations. Above all, conclusions must follow evidence, not lead it. Because if this case is pressed closed before questions are answered, the public won't forget. They'll continue to ask, who really decided when a case can end? Was this investigation led by Utah or quietly led from elsewhere? In the end, the accusations aren't of wrongdoing, they are of withheld opportunity. And that's what demands scrutiny. This story is far from over. And with every update, we'll be here, watching, questioning, and pushing for clarity. Stay subscribed. Stay alert. Because the truth deserves the time and the respect that investigations promise but sometimes fail to deliver.